thanks for joining us for the session this afternoon. We're going to be looking at libraries in lockdown and also thinking about the role of libraries in supporting wellbeing, particularly the impact of public libraries in Scotland on loneliness in communities. So a really interesting topic. My name's Sara-Anne Munoz. I'm a Professor of Rural Health. I'm based at the University of the Highlands and Islands in Inverness. My background is in health geography, so I'm really interested in the relationship between different spaces, different places, and our health and well-being individually and at a community level. So most of my work has been within rural, remote or island contexts. And I'm really interested in how community assets like libraries can play a role in supporting well-being. And we've got two main speakers today who I'll introduce just now at the start of the session. Firstly, we're going to hear from Jeanette Castle, so thank you for joining us. Jeanette's a university librarian at the University of the West of Scotland and the Phillips Honorary Vice President. She's worked in school and public libraries over a lengthy career and has particular interests in libraries' impact on communities, cross-sectoral partnerships, community co-production, sharing libraries' knowledge and skills, digital transformation and library advocacy. And she's currently in year 3 of a professional doctorate. And we're also very pleased to be joined by Peter Reid. Thank you for being here today. Peter's a Professor of Librarianship and his work covers a wide range of cultural and cultural heritage related topics. He teaches on library management, cultural heritage, cultural tourism and media history and has taught at RGU since 1998. Hopefully, we've got a good lineup and we will be able to take some questions at the end of the session overall. So I'm going to just give a quick introduction to the topic before we hear from our main speakers. So you might wonder why, as a Professor of Rural Health, I'm interested in being part of the conference. And I'd say that it comes back to my background as a geographer, and particularly as a health geographer. And seeing health as more than just a biomedical definition. So thinking about health and well-being as linked to people's sense of belonging, their sense of identity, and sense of community and connection, which I think we heard about these kind of themes in the first keynote this morning. You're probably aware of the research that says social isolation can be as bad for you as smoking tobacco. It's linked to things like or correlations with heart disease, for example. And as our population in Scotland is becoming older, there are more people living alone, there are more people living with one or often more than one long-term condition. These are all things that are associated with poorer mental health and poorer physical health outcomes. But they're not necessarily things that need a medical or a clinical intervention. So as a health geographer, I'm really interested in how things like our neighbourhoods, our communities, our cities and regions are actually bound up with our own sense of health and well-being and the mental health and physical health outcomes that we see across space. As I mentioned, I particularly look at that in a remote and rural context. But I think we're seeing wider recognition of this connection, the connection that exists between our communities, the communities in which we live, and our health and well-being that's around something other than statutory health service provision. So I think libraries are a good example of the type of non-medical assets within our communities that can help support health and well-being. Others might be things like town halls, parks, beaches, leisure centres, museums. These things, I think, can help keep us well without what's often expensive or challenging clinical or pharmaceutical intervention. So that's what we're going to be thinking about today. So I think geographers have been aware of these kind of relationships for quite a long time, and we're increasingly seeing them coming out in policy, in health policy. This recognition that community assets can impact on really the much more upstream determinants of mental health and physical health outcomes. So things like social, cultural, and economic environments. So I think one of the first papers that I read around this health and place connections kind of stuck with me over the last, how many years, 15 years or so. And it was written by 4 prominent health geographers and had I think the great title of Mingling, Observing and Lingering: Everyday Public Spaces and Their Implication for Wellbeing and Social Relations. And I think that it still very much resonates with my work and the topic that we're going to be looking at today. So just a brief quote from that key paper. They talk about how they can demonstrate that ordinary spaces are a significant resource for both individuals and communities. And the beneficial properties of public spaces are not reducible to natural or aesthetic criteria, but social interaction in public spaces can provide relief from daily routines, sustenance for people's sense of community, opportunities for sustaining bonding ties or making bridges, and can influence people's tolerance and raise people's spirits. They also possess subjective meanings that accumulate over time and contribute to meeting diverse needs. And different users of public spaces attain a sense of well-being for different reasons. So that's something that's kind of stuck with me during my work. So my contention would be that there's scope to see libraries as assets, and that these are assets not least within our public health system within Scotland. They're key spaces which can help alleviate these upstream determinants of health. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of the topic that we're going to be thinking about today. And I'm going to introduce our first main speaker, who is Jeanette, if you'd like to
keep to my time. Thank you to Sean and Richard for the opportunity to come and talk about what I'm doing with my research. I'm at very early stages. As has been said, I'm doing a professional doctorate. I'm in year 3, but that's because there's 2 taught years in the professional doctorate at the University of West of Scotland. So I have learned my research skills and my background and my literature reviews and how to do all those kind of things. Skills actually that I wish that I'd had in professional practice 30 years ago when I was actually implementing health and wellbeing projects. I thought I would start with my motivation for the research. When I think of libraries, I think of community and safety and a plethora of buildings that I've sought out and stumbled across over my 50 plus years. I think of the intangible feeling of joy in the discovery on library shelves of works of fiction and non-fiction, and the welcome the staff extend to the stranger, as well as the buildings themselves. Some grand, some in large cupboards or pull-out cases in community centres. The discovery that the first library I managed, a school library, provided a safe haven for a group of pupils who were bullied, lonely and socially isolated in a secondary school, was really important in embedding what is really important for my library and information professional practice. Libraries of all kinds are embedded in communities, and I don't know if you know about the concept of community anchors, but that's something that I've discovered over the last few years, and actually I've probably always known. This makes them the natural host for addressing health inequalities as outlined in the settings-based approach. If any of you have ever read the Macmillan Cancer Information Support Service in Glasgow Libraries, there's a paper by Whitelaw in 2017 that actually gives the real reasons why the library is in that setting. I can talk about that for a long time, but I'll not go into that just now. My key motivation for wanting to work on this research topic is that because I have developed health and wellbeing initiatives across various library sectors and have an overview of what's delivered and the impact it makes on individuals and communities, but observed that much of it is not joined up across sectors. Just as an example, when public library staff deliver summer reading in West Lothian, where I used to work, we did the reading ninja sessions to school children in economically deprived areas. And we evidenced an increase in library borrowing in the community libraries. The educational impact wasn't measured with other sectors, and it wasn't shared with school librarians, who then started from scratch in trying to enthuse children coming into secondary school. The reading ninja sessions were delivered by the Public Library Service, and we also worked with social services through attainment funding streams and created a link for non-engaged parents to find out about council literacy services and support from social services. So where library sectors can work together and measure impact together, they can build services around the same service objectives and strategies. And all too often public libraries are given initiatives to deliver from NHS or third sector, but haven't been involved in actually developing them and sharing the objectives. Further motivations came from reflecting on my role as a peer assessor and how good is our public library service, leading teams acting as a critical friend to library services and developing a hypothesis where conditions for partnership working are well developed. Health and wellbeing initiatives deliver increased benefits to the communities and the individuals that they serve. A search of the literature shows that there is a real lack of research looking at that area, and the aim for this research is to provide an evidence base through analysis of the context and mechanisms deployed by services to provide guidance to practitioners in terms of framework building and to contribute to successful service development. I have grand aspirations. As I say, I'm just at the start of the journey. Public library services have a long history of providing public good in our communities. They have an important central role in society to deliver reading, learning and cultural benefits and acting as a community anchor. I've got a slide of references that you might be interested in, and there's a paper by Moxley and Abbas from 2016 who look at that community anchor. There's lots in the literature from social work actually talking about public libraries being community anchors and how their profession can work through public libraries through shared objectives. We have quality networks such as quality frameworks such as how good is our public library service, as well as service reviews, budget reviews, and expectations of senior management constantly asking us to demonstrate our impact. And practitioners find this really challenging. This research, fingers crossed, will identify what contexts and mechanisms we need to consider and how meaningful impact can be measured and contribute back into professional, individual service development and wider professional policy development. From an autobiographical viewpoint, supporting individuals and communities through the provision of library services and a safe, trusted community space actually align with my core values. We have the knowledge we're taught at library school. We have the knowledge we build as we go through our career. But we always have those core values, which is at the heart of what drives us as professionals. And my core beliefs are in a supportive society and institutions like libraries supporting people who most need that support and not allocating support by postcodes. Loneliness, isolation and digital poverty in communities transcend age, gender, economic, social and cultural status. And the public library from the age of the mechanics institutes in the 18th century, the Carnegie libraries in the early 19th century, and the community hub and partnership centres of the 21st century exist to provide that access to information and support across all our communities. The results of the impact on communities that Professor Reid and Lindsay Blois delivered in 2021 when libraries were closed due to COVID. I heard a talk from Peter and Lindsay about this, and what came out of that for me, it was that idea of people and connection with people during lockdown when library staff were in some cases phoning up individuals. Libraries have been identified as key delivery agencies and the Scottish Government COVID recovery strategy. So they know our importance. Professional practice, as I've said, formed the hypothesis for this study, which has at its core my belief in librarians working through public libraries, create and develop those mechanisms to reach out to the public, to achieve the objectives of the health and social care profession in working with communities. So, my key research question, I've probably gone off script, which I usually do. I didn't mention the Rival Network, which is Research Impact Value, which is a group of practitioners and researchers, and that was a key motivation for me to think, well, maybe I could do some research, maybe it is useful for the profession to do this. So I can't forget them. So my key question the research seeks to answer is, how can libraries as a place-based anchor institution contribute to the reduction of loneliness and isolation in communities? How do public libraries, how do we improve that role in supporting connectivity as part of urban infrastructure? I won't go on to talk about anchor institutions because that's another thing that I could talk about all day. The focus is looking at libraries being a catalyst for social participation, and I think we can do that. I think we're doing it. And Peter's getting worried because I'm going on. These are the definitions that I'm using in my research, and this comes from Connected Scotland, the government report from 2019, which has just been refreshed. Really, just so we're clear about what loneliness is. Subjective feeling experienced where there's a difference between the social relationships we would like to have and those we have, and social isolation, where an individual has an objective lack of social relationships in terms of quality and quantity at individual, group, community and societal levels. So these are the definitions that I'm using as the research progresses. I did think about taking social isolation out, and I piloted my questionnaire with some service managers and librarians, and they said, why have you not got social isolation? Because that's the terms that the community use. So it went back in. So this is what I'm attempting to do. There's an awful lot of background. Things that we're doing, like a collective force for health and wellbeing, the refresh in 2022. We've got partnerships across the board, some ad hoc, some not, with health and wellbeing, practitioners. And you can see, I should put my glasses on now, this is the route that I'm taking and the justification for my research. I've probably said all of them. And these are the core drivers for me in the development of the public library strategy. These are the things that we've identified, and they all contribute towards that community anchor rationale. So, I am doing what's called a realist evaluation. Now, if I had said those terms a couple of years ago, probably I wouldn't understand what they are. But these are my research questions. What I'm trying to do is dig underneath the surface of partnerships, engagement with communities, how we work with individuals. So these are some of the things. These are my hunches from professional practice, and realist evaluation is about developing some hunches you have and then going out and trying to prove or disprove if they're in reality or not. Realist evaluation is absolutely fascinating, and there's some really great reading on my slide of references about what it delivers and what it can do for us. It's well used in the NHS, and that's one of the reasons, because it's health and wellbeing, I wanted to use that methodology to take me through. So it's all about how can libraries, place-based anchor institutions, actually, how can we find out? And my objective is to explore and identify cross-sectoral aims and deliverables where we can reduce loneliness and social isolation in communities, identify how key partnerships work and impact on people. It's about giving our service users some agency. We don't just go in and deliver interventions. We need to make sure actually that we're co-producing interventions with the users, and actually they're getting out of it what they need, especially in areas of loneliness and isolation. We know that loneliness significantly impacts on life expectancy, physical health. It is a real problem in society, and we know that the NHS spend a great deal of money trying to fix the issues that people have where they're not addressed. So what I'd really like to think, one of my hunches is that there's a bit of work to do in identifying preventative spend. I don't know if the research will find that, but I think libraries absolutely do that. This is my research design. Critical realism, I'm not going to explain what that is, but it's a realist approach of trying to see, it's like a big iceberg. You can only see what's delivered at the top. There's a whole load of things going on in terms of partnerships underneath, and that's the methodology that I'm going to use. So I've got a questionnaire going out, and then I will do 6 case studies. Oh, sorry, running over my time. So I will be coming out to talk to yourselves. I hope you'll want to work with me in trying to uncover where we can find great practice and how we can share that as well.
Good afternoon, folks. As I was sitting there, I was thinking that 11 years ago, almost to the day, I wound up my presidential conference on this very spot, calling out the analogy with Andrew Carnegie using the torch as an emblem in many of his buildings. And it was really apposite because it was the day that the Olympic baton relay was going round the city and through Fife. And I think that sort of analogy still absolutely holds true about libraries being a beacon, and as Jeanette has said, something that's absolutely central to our communities. I'm going to speak about a piece of research that we did during the first lockdown, basically from June of 2020 through until the end of that year. We were really fortunate to work with Pamela and the team at SLIC as collaborators on this, and it was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I should say that it's probably the last money that I will ever get from the Arts and Humanities Research Council, because not long afterwards I invited Chris Smith, who was an academic just over the water in St Andrews, but is now the Chief Executive of Arts and Humanities Research Council. I invited him to be a speaker on an event on Zoom during lockdown. And he came and he accepted, and any of you who've been unfortunate enough to have been on a Zoom call with me will know that it's invariably gate crashed by my cat. And as Chris was speaking and being really serious, my cat, instead of putting his nose into the webcam, put the other end and lifted the tail. So I will probably never have Arts and Humanities Research Council funding again. This research, we did something, it was myself and Lindsay Messier, Lindsay Bloys as she then was, who conducted this research. And I'm going to say a bit about how we did it, and then I'm going to speak about some of the results. The first thing, and we opened the report with these words, and it's quite a dangerous or novel thing for an academic, I think, to open the research report, saying that they got the research wrong. But we absolutely did get the research wrong, in the sense that we created the proposal and we posited the research around the notion that we were looking at this abstract thing of libraries in lockdown. Now, the reality is, and all of the interviews and all of the data showed this, that it's not this abstract thing of the library, it's the people that actually work in it. So it should have been librarians in lockdown, and I mean that. The senior managers, I mean the people at the chalk face, I mean everyone who is engaged in working in a library had played a part during lockdown. And so it comes with that health warning. Just as a bit of background, UKRI, the UK Research and Innovation, streamlined all of their procedures in the first weeks of lockdown to get money out to researchers really quickly. AHRC is enormously complicated to get money from. Normally it's jumping through lots of hoops. They streamlined it to basically a 6-week process, and we were the 7th project that they funded. So I applied in the April, basically a month after lockdown, and I had the money, or the university had the money by the beginning of June. That's almost unheard of. So it meant we could get off the blocks really, really quickly. Now, that health warning is important because I fundamentally believe the point that I've put there, and I've reiterated it several times in the report and on the website, I'll give you the URL at the very end, that services only exist because people make them happen. And I think that was really evident in the research that we did. We set out at the beginning, in the first 3 months of the project, to basically look at all the social media content that public library services. We looked at all 32 authorities, and Lindsay, bless her, took over 4,000 snips of content from various social media platforms. And we did a bit of analysis around the types of content, the reach that it was having, how communities were engaging with it, and of course the diversity of stuff that the sector was doing. So everything from knitting online, or food and health work, the loneliness kinds of things that we've heard about. And it was hugely impressive. And the 4,000 snips of content were analysed, and a flavour of them is in both the report and online. Thereafter, from sort of the late summer, now bear in mind that some libraries were actually trying to reopen from July of 2020 onwards, and we can all tell tales of library services that did that absolutely brilliantly, and some that had almost insurmountable organisational issues around that. So we were actually carrying out the interviews at the period where there was some limited reopening. It may have been in the form of click and collect rather than people going in and browsing and so on. We were very interested in the different governance models, whether it made a difference if a service was in a culture and leisure trust, or just a cultural trust, or in direct local authority and control. So we tried to stratify the sample for that. We interviewed 19 service managers. By the time we were at about 17 and a half, certainly by the time we were at 18, we felt that we were getting to the point of saturation. We could have gone on ad infinitum collecting new examples of something innovative done on Facebook. But in terms of the substantive things, we felt that we were at saturation point. We did a survey of statistics, particularly around ebooks, and between the surveys and the interviews, we had 86% coverage. So what I want to do, the substantive bit of what I'm going to talk about for sort of the next 10 minutes, is basically the voices of Scottish librarians during lockdown. And this chimes to some of the things that we've already heard, excuse me, we've already heard this morning. There's so much in the final report and on the website. This is just really a flavour of it. I'm not going to pretend that the garden is all wonderful and rosy. I'm going to flag some of the issues that we encountered. But the passion for serving individuals, communities, and society as a whole was the thing that strongly shone through in all of the interviews that we did. So you can see there, we deal with human beings on a daily basis. The things we do are important for the mental health, stimulating people creatively and intellectually, particularly when people are locked in houses. But senior managers didn't see that potential. And that was something that came across in a number of places, that we would have senior library managers saying that we're almost an emergency service, but our high Hidians, to use that good phrase, don't perhaps understand or appreciate that. There was one service that spoke to us about the council had suddenly realised there was no way of getting hearing aid batteries to people because they didn't realise that the library did that. So that's an advocacy issue, I think, connected with this. You can see that again from the second quote there. That there was perhaps some organisational apathy or lack of understanding that the impacts that the library have on health and well-being and social isolation and all of those creativity aspects mentioned in the first quote. So there's still internal advocacy that needs to be done. We heard from a number of services, you know, the old chestnut about how many branches are we going to close, and that we only need a central library. Now we all know that that does not make an adequate public library service, and this kind of links back to what I was saying on the previous slide. About libraries being at the very heart of their community. We all know the adage, we're not just books. And we all, I hope, believe that very strongly. Books, central, absolutely crucial. But we do so much more to facilitate the life of communities and therefore the lives of individuals. And you can see that strongly reiterated by a service manager. All these quotes are from individual service managers that we interviewed. We're more than a depository for books, and we're not a middle-class service, which is something that is often a perception. It's the people who have the least that need the libraries most. And that was something that came out very, very strongly across the research we did. There was amazing creativity to support different parts of the community, and I think that's probably true across 32 local authorities. It would be invidious to single out one particular library service. Obviously, with my northeast chip on my shoulder, I have selected two from Aberdeenshire, needless to say, but the other one is from Shetland. And Catherine Jeromeson, who some of you might know, did the BookBug stuff, aided and abetted by her husband, who in one actually dressed up in a frock. So, you know, there was imagination and creativity demonstrated. One of the things that was very evident was the closeness between the library staff and the communities that they serve. We need to target vulnerable people, looking at books at home for kids, those who were in the children's hospital. Many library staff were working with food banks and were redeployed into other services because they had first-class organisational skills. And the services, even though people were all working from home, were very clear about this supporting vulnerable parts of the community. And that came across over and over again. One service in particular that I could probably, I won't name any of them, but I could probably have predicted would be doing in the vanguard of this, because I know it has a closeness to its community. In the early days, when staff maybe didn't have IT access or laptops at home and so on, they said, phone our customers, phone the people that we know are vulnerable, the people who are not on anyone else's radar. And that they found that good, supportive, useful work for their staff to be deployed in. And it wasn't about, do you want to borrow a book? Or, do you want a van to come round with a book? It was genuinely just asking about well-being. So it was, how are you doing? And if they weren't on other people's radar, they could then perhaps alert other services. And there was one person who received one of these phone calls from the library, said, you're the first person I've talked to in 2 weeks. So it does matter, and individual anecdotal stuff often matters hugely. We heard from one service about the horrific costs or consequences of lockdown for new mothers. So this is another perhaps hidden part of what libraries do. So they work proactively within the library service, with other agencies, with Home Start and so on, because this was a constituency that they had identified as being particularly vulnerable. Now, you only do that, we only manage to do that if, as librarians, we are very close to and understand fully our community. This was something that I didn't expect, and when Person X who said this, I thought, gosh, that's really impressive. We all know the mental health implications that lockdown had, and we saw that right across the research that we did, particularly amongst young people, and that was a strong preoccupation for many service managers. Sorry, frog in my throat today. Many service managers. And they were really concerned about the corollary of that, the child protection issues, the rise in alcohol or domestic abuse, and that's been well documented in other pieces of research. I'm emphasising all of this because my central message is that libraries are so embedded in their communities that they understand what's going on, and they are remarkably well placed to be identifying and on the lookout for these things. I said that we're not just books, but we are books to our very core. They matter to us. They're the fundamental building block of everything that we do. And the appreciation when Click and Collect came in, or book deliveries came in, was absolutely enormous. And these are just, I could have filled 6 slides with quotes that we had like that. Notes saying, thank you for my books, it's like Christmas. And that shows that our service absolutely really matters. Now, one thing that I want to touch on in the last 2 or 3 slides is that there was a strong debate around virtual and digital, and we know that that's happened outside our sector as well. And a lot of the people that we spoke to were tech evangelists, I think is probably fair to say. But as we've heard from Jeanette earlier, the physical space actually really matters. And we got lots of comments around the engagement with the digital, the fatigue that came in about it, and the fact that it didn't really overcome the isolation issues that the physical space has. There is one quote, and I don't know if I've got it on the next slide, so if I have, forgive me. But one person, one service manager in an authority in the sort of greater Glasgow area, said, society is doomed if we just go into digital silos. We need the physical space, and I think probably most of us would agree with that. But that came through really, really strongly. In fact, I do the middle quote there. You know me, I'm a techie. I don't believe the digital side is more important than the physical side. We can't become people that live in silos and have everything delivered to us digitally. Society is doomed if that happens. And that's one of the quotes that really stuck out for me. Now, I'm just going to dwell before I finish on this last quote here, because this one really moved me. Remember, we were speaking to the senior managers in each of the authorities. And this senior manager knew of one guy in a particular branch who came in 2 or 3 times a week, read the newspapers and had a sleep. Now, that's brilliant. If he feels that the library is his safe space to come in, get warm, read the papers, and then have 40 winks, I think that's brilliant. And that says something. Now, that's maybe something that's difficult to play to funders. We're a DOS house. No, we're not. And please don't tweet that I said that. But this head of service knew that individual user in that branch. And again, that's the closeness that we have to our communities. So I've run over. Everything is in libraries in lockdown.com. The whole report, every quote that we used. It's divided up into the various chapters. There is also an academic article that we produced from it as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much to both our speakers. I think really inspiring and great to hear about the current research that's happening, so thanks very much. We've got a couple of minutes if anyone's got a burning question. We're almost at lunch break, and I'm sure speakers will be happy to chat to you then as well. But yeah, do you have a question there?
It's not really a question, but just something I want to add to Peter's excellent work here. One of my PhD students did a paper that he presented at the I-Conference in March this year, and he's a librarian from Nigeria who basically looked as well as he could at library services in the UK and in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, all the libraries shut down because they have no infrastructure, they have no internet in most cases. Librarians didn't have laptops that they could use to work at home. They didn't have, in some cases, they don't even have access to reliable electricity in Nigeria. So I want to just, thank the librarians for what they did, but also I think that we should be incredibly fortunate in the West that we could at least do what we were able to do, even though it's certainly not close to what we can offer in person. But the fact that we were at least able to use the best with what we had, which is all librarians are really good for doing anyway, we're excellent at that. But just remember, we are in a fortunate position, and to be grateful for that as well.
Absolutely, thanks very much. I think we can bring the session to a close. It's the lunch break now, but if you'd join me in thanking our speakers again. Thank you.